I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Beth Bovis. I'm a partner at Kearney, a global management consulting service, and I'm the head of our social impact initiatives. And I'm especially proud of work that we do in the circular space, and really excited for this panel we have here today with us. I'm going to make a few remarks, and then I'll introduce our panelists here. First off, thanks for being here, because I know how critical circularity is to what we all have to do for the planet and for the economy. And we need more circularity today, and we need to find better and more ways to bring consumers and the economic models together in order to make circularity a success. Some of you may have seen this in other sessions. We are at less than 9% of what is produced is in a circular model. And if we want to meet the goals that have been set out by COP26, we need to double that every 5 years in order to get to where we need to go. And we start talking about circularity, we're talking about the need for materials, the need not only to reduce carbon footprint and reduce waste, but also, very importantly, the need to reuse some of these materials to lessen the impact on our planet. One of the things that we see in circularity is that nobody can do it on their own. And this is both the exciting part of it and the exciting part of who we have here on the panel, but also the challenging part of it. It's an ecosystem in order to drive this. We need the combination of the brands and the companies, the supply chain partners that work with them, innovators and entrepreneurs who are thinking of new ways to do work in a circular manner, and our consumers, which we're going to talk about here today, to think about circularity different. And a few things, we ran a few surveys, and just a few things that give you a sense of both how much this is wanted and how far we have to go. When we asked folks, do you want more circularity? That's like asking, do you like babies? 78% of people say, yes, I want more circular products. I want more circularity. I want recycled content in what I buy. I'm looking for those solutions. But then when we ask the simple question of, would you be willing to bring a bag to the store so that you don't have to get a single-use plastic bag or even paper bag? That drops down to below 60%. So nearly 80% saying, yes, I want it. Then a big drop on, am I willing to carry a bag into a store in order to be a part of the circular solution? And then when we ask, well, would you be willing to pay a little more for a product if it was circular? That drops to less than half of the people. So you see this drop-off between intent and action. And the panel we have here represents some of the bright spots of people not only having ambition, but actually taking action as well. So I'm going to briefly introduce our panelists, but then with the first question, they're going to share a little bit more about themselves and their organizations. First, we have Surendra. Surendra is the founder of Gemini Corporation, and this corporation, founded in 1989, it was founded on the mindset of circularity and is a consumer-driven circular company dealing with that end-of-life cycle dimension. And so really excited to have him here. We have Laurent here from Nestle. And while Laurent is the CEO for the Latin America zone, he's also here because he is one of the biggest champions of circularity within Nestle and really helping to pioneer what they're doing in that space and bringing that forward. And then Karsten is here, and Karsten has taken on as the co-founder of the Circular Valley in Germany, where we see a lot of entrepreneurs coming together to really test out in a real ecosystem, an economic ecosystem, how can circularity really work and come to life. And the reason, other than their amazing accomplishments, the reason why we're so excited to have this particular panel is because they do represent that end-to-end ecosystem that we have. And what we need is innovation, and we need our corporations, and we need our supply chain partners to make this happen. So we're quite excited with this. So I'm going to just start with you, Surendra, and then we'll go down. Just the first question is, we do know that there is this clamoring for more circularity, but there is this gap between action. Tell me what has changed and how is this impacting your business, and what have you been able to do?
Thank you, Beth. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I strongly believe when it comes to taking a decision between a linear product and a circular product, there's a tremendous amount of ignorance, both in the minds of consumers and the leaders. Let's look at the story of plastics, which is part of everyday's life. I have been in the business of plastic recycling for the last 34 years. This is my passion, this is my profession. When I started the business, truly speaking, I didn't know the word sustainability, I didn't know the word circularity. Somebody had to do it, and the business was not looked upon in a very well way. The scrap business, nobody would trust you, you would belong to a different strata of business. And now we work in 60 countries. We collect waste from over 1,000 locations every month. And what's the sad story of plastics? Every day we generate almost 1 million tons of plastic waste, 1 million tons. And like you said, Beth, less than 10% is recycled. Despite so many debates and discussions over the last few years, would you believe if I say to you that the global plastic recycling rate is going down? It's going down. As per a report which came on 22nd April last month, in the US, it was down by 5.7%. How many of you are aware about these disturbing realities? And it becomes all the more significant because the plastic touches the life of everybody, every day, everywhere. And yet there is so much ignorance about the enormity of the problem. Yes, I agree, as the knowledge about circularity, about the environmental impact goes into the mind of consumers, they would adopt more and more circular products. And happily, they would be willing to pay. But what about the businessmen? Are they prepared to pay extra cost? Are they willing to bear the cost, the future cost of collection, future cost of disposal of materials? And this is going to be very challenging, more so when there is a competition in these commoditized business of plastic items. So it's going to be very challenging, very difficult for the leaders to adjust to this new economics of circularity. This is my belief.
Thank you so much. Laurent?
Yeah, I fully agree, obviously. We have to break a number of paradigms, like the concept of life cycle or end of life. In the concept of circularity, there is no end of life. The life cycle is a cycle of regeneration. So there are so many dimensions to it, looking at the entire value chain and so many things that have to happen for this to move from nice discussions, awareness building sessions to actions, and actions at scale. I guess there are many solutions that are being piloted or identified as we speak, but the big challenge is how do we scale those initiatives and make sure that they can bring the solution that we need with the speed that we need, of course, because there is urgency. Time is of the essence. Back to the consumer piece, which I guess is kind of essential, because the consumers vote every day when they buy or don't buy, when they choose. Yes, there is increasing awareness, consciousness, interest, especially among the younger generation in developed countries. But I'm not sure this totally reflects the global reality. And we should not forget that there is close to 1 billion people starving still nowadays. And the challenge of circularity is also the challenge of food security, making sure that the 1/3 plus of the food produced that is going to waste can finally get to the consumers. So yeah, there are huge dimensions to it. I think it's global. I think it's also local in nature, because many solutions are just local in nature. Just one anecdote, but which I found really nice. I was visiting a couple of weeks ago in Brazil, a center where we customize the offering for Nespresso or Nescafé Dolce Gusto buyers. So they can select the capsules. They don't need to buy 15 or 10 of one kind. If they want one or two, or they select as to make a count of 50, but they can select what they want. For the pack from which it is sent to the consumers, as the products are fragile, the custom was to put those bubble plastic to kind of protect the end product. And the team came across with a very simple and smart idea, which is to take the shipment cartons that are making it to the center, to shred them and to replace the plastic bubble stuff by those carton pieces, which work very well. And so it's a small anecdote, but I just want to highlight that things will not come from the top necessarily. I mean, the top has to set the ambition, set the framework, but there are lots of local initiatives also that have to take place for circularity to be a living reality at scale.
Thank you so much. Karsten, I think you're living that in the Circular Valley. Maybe you can share a little bit more.
Yeah, I'd like to pick up on the points of collaboration and the big issue that you described, Beth. So only 9% of emissions being recycled, which leaves close to 100 billion tons of emissions every year, which go from the technosphere to the biosphere. I mean, it's a number, it's a monstrous number. Nobody can imagine how big it is. But if you break it down on a per person and per day level, it's almost 40 kilograms. We are not that aware of. That is our backpack, which we carry around each and every day, on average, on this planet. And so many stakeholder groups being aware of it, consumers, activists, companies, politicians, we thought there needs to be a place where people can convene and work on that. Very much like Silicon Valley is the place to be if you want to do something in digital. So if you are a talented programmer from India or from Colombia, you will head to Silicon Valley. But where do you go if you are a talented person in the area of closing circles and you come from Australia or Malaysia or Peru? Where are you headed? It didn't exist so far, and that is why we said, let's try to set up a place where such people can convene. And we called it Circular Valley. And then we looked, where could that possibly be? What is an ideal place for a Circular Valley? And finally, we arrived with a region in Germany. Many of you may know it's the Rhine-Ruhr region. It is Germany's largest cosmopolitan area. There is 15 million people living in that area. But it's not the number of people which is so distinctive. It is five arguments in point of the region. First, it has over 300 world market leaders from all industries. And if you want to cooperate, you need to be together, physically together, because we're talking about working on stuff here. This is not something in the digital area, but you really need to come down. You need to sit at the extruder and discuss how can recycled plastics be reused again. So it is argument number one, 300 market leaders. Argument number two, the largest amount of companies active in the area of recycling in Europe. It is the largest density. And then point number three is, it is the largest density of scientific institutions with a focus on recycling. There is over 70 institutions. It's Max Planck Institutes, Fraunhofer Institutes. It is excellent universities. And the proximity of companies and science is what has made Silicon Valley so great. It was Stanford University and the semiconductor companies back then in the 60s. And then there is two additional factors. One, it's a super international region. You have 195 nations represented, and it is the place of the first and second industrial revolution on the European continent. So basically, where the genie was let out of the bottle 200 years ago, now we can reinvent another industrial revolution, and that is what we started to do. And the first important point is setting up an accelerator that brings together people from all countries, and we will now start our third cohort in a couple of weeks. It is 35 startups from all over the world, from Malaysia to Colombia to Canada, working on the most different topics, and as discussed before, bringing together companies, bringing together people.
Excellent. Thank you so much. You know, as we talked about, the this gap between intent and action. You referenced a couple of challenges, scale being one, getting people physically together, figuring out the economics of the system. When you look at the challenges going forward, because these are known challenges that people are working on, what are some of the next challenges as we get over this? What are the next things we need to be looking for as innovators? Because we're starting to have solutions, we're starting to be able to scale, we're bringing together innovators, but is that going to be enough? So, Surinder, do you want to start, and then?
Well, to accelerate the journey towards more circularity based on my experience, we need to take some specific actions. First, I felt that we need to inform the consumers and the general public about a lot of things. There's so much misconceptions. For instance, the most important one when it comes to the plastics, that the goods made from recycled materials are inferior in the quality. I read recently in a waste magazine that goods made from plastics, recycled plastics, are harmful to the human beings. I wish I could talk to the author and inform him that in UK, the milk bottles are made up with 30% recycled content. Which mother would allow her children to drink milk from a bottle which is made with the harmful materials? There's a lot of misconceptions, particularly in the developing world. And the second, the most important, I feel that to accelerate, we have to make sure that the polluter pays the principles across the board. Start with the consumer. They must pay for the convenience, for instance, of the plastics. And they must be asked to pay upfront. Similarly, the same goes for the producers. I think this extended producer responsibility mechanism needs to be implemented and enforced strictly. But I would like to add one condition. Usually, the producer pays once the product is put in the market. I would say they should do it upfront while they purchase the raw materials, similar what's being done in South Africa. Otherwise, in developing world, you would never see the funds. And these funds should be used primarily for creating infrastructure for collection and for recycling and for designing the product for circularity.
And Laurent, what about from the producer side?
Yeah, to take the big picture, because I think the resources are kind of there, potentially. They have been identified, and there is willingness to invest over the long run. There are three conditions to development, and that's valid for the environment as much as it's valid for economic and social development. And the three pillars are, number one, rule of law, regulations. Smart regulations might sound strange that someone from the industry is asking for regulation, but we like smart regulation. Creates level playing field, creates incentives as well, and helps differentiate the ones that are working for the common good and those who disregard it. So that's one. The second one is infrastructures. You mentioned it. It's absolutely critical. It's a shame when you look at some countries, some of the most developed countries in the world, and you look at the percentage of the waste they recycle. It's appalling. So the opportunity and the potential is there, but we need investments. It's not only governmental investments, has to be also regional and local, depending on the way things are managed. So we need those investments, and the private sector is ready to invest or co-invest in public-private partnerships. And the third one is education. We need to educate policymakers. We need to educate business people. We need to educate the consumers, starting at a young age, that there should be no waste. Waste is unacceptable, and everything has a value and has to be reused, recycled, and there is no end of life. That should be the mindset of everyone. I think it's there in some parts of the world, but when you look at the magnitude of the challenge, certainly education is a big part of it.
Karsten, would you like to build on that?
Yeah, maybe adding one point. I think we are doing very well in the area of single-use packaging, for example, in some geographies. Definitely not all. So Europe much better than Asia. So, but that is in principle well covered. What I see as more or less unaddressed is all the materials which we are now producing for the green revolution. So the composite materials that you have in wind turbines or PV cells, and we are producing hundreds of millions of tons of that, lithium-ion batteries, so creating big issues moving forward, and now is the ideal time to think how can those be produced in a way that they can later be reused, remanufactured, or recycled. So moving into that area of more durable goods, which we need for the green transformation, and not creating additional issues that will come like a boomerang to us in 15 or 20 years.
Thanks. One of the things, that we found in our survey, again, when we asked people in the workforce, we said, what skill sets in the area of sustainability would you want to develop? Like where, if you could get certified. Circularity was one of the top ones. 45% of the people said, I would love to actually understand more and actually maybe have a career in that space. And it was one of the highest ranked one, which is wonderful. How do we engage the young workforce and create those opportunities and those jobs? Because they are both the consumers and the workers. They kind of serve both purposes. And how do we engage them and create more opportunities to bring that in, bring that into each organization or spawn new organizations to do that? I don't know, Karsten, since you're kind of doing the entrepreneurs, maybe you could start in terms of thinking about how we tap into this desire for this to be a future skill like programming was.
Well, speaking from a Circular Valley Accelerator perspective, it is just providing the opportunities. So we had almost 500 applications for our latest batch, and they come from all parts of the world. You use LinkedIn or other social media just to make it known. And they will come. And if we look at our own people, so our internal staff, they are dropping out of consulting. Could you imagine? Yeah, leaving Accenture or maybe leaving Kearney for such a course. So I think it's very much about providing the opportunity, which is now happening, which we didn't have 2 years ago. But in this overall change of perspective post-COVID, we are seeing completely new path into the workwear here.
Laurent, are you seeing you're able to tap into that in your projects?
So we come back to the point of education. No? The learning and training is, of course, very, very critical. And I don't see that as an add-on for those motivated or engaged who want to know more. But I see that as a must. It has to be central. This is the way we want to do business. This is the way we want to design products, design our value chain, and it's not just a nice add-on. It has to be central, and I would tend to believe that has become central in our organization. That this is just the way we want to do business, and looking at how can we make the best possible use of existing resources and think circularity, think regeneration in everything we do. And if it's well done, actually, it makes economical sense as well, in most cases. So it's not just good for the environment or for the community. It's also just good business. So yeah, we want it to be really embedded among marketeers, product designers, R&D people.
And what about, the workforce on your side is right in the midst of it.
Well, I tend to take some negative sides as well. I tend to inform, to build on what Laurent says. We need to educate the people. We need to inform them, and many times I share some frightening information that if we don't do enough, in case of plastics, the way we are using the plastic, handling the plastic at the end of its life, there would be more plastics than fish, which we all heard. At this rate, if we continue to go on, the world would have 12 billion tons, not millions, 12 billion tons of plastic waste around us. So these are the points we try to say, but more than that, there needs to be more positive communications as well, and there are misunderstandings generated by simple words like make the word plastic free. I would rather say make the word plastic friendly. This morning I heard that there is a problem, there's a war on plastics. No, it's not a war on plastic, it's a war on the plastic waste. So there are a lot of issues which we need to sort out, and I think there are many organizations like I see here, the CEO of Alliance to End Plastic Waste, Jacob, is here. They are doing a wonderful job to promote the knowledge about one of the issues which the plastic industry sooner or later going to face, that some young entrepreneurs or young people may not be willing to join the plastic work in view of all the connotations around it, and they are doing a wonderful job. The Alliance, they are doing a wonderful job to promote how we are taking actions to end the plastic waste. Alliance to End Plastic Waste is based in Singapore, and it's a relatively new organization, 3 years old, but the outreach they have gone into it has a tremendous in tremendous directions all over the world. And I think these are the things we need to inform the young people, so they, instead of becoming frightened, they feel responsible that, yes, we have to put in our bit to make sure that the world is a better place to live.
Thanks. I'm going to pick up on that theme because, so in getting ready for today, I said, how can I wear and embody circularity, and I could only get to 50%. So 50% of what I have on my body is reused, recycled, or can be reused and recycled, or is made from plastic waste. So, but it was only 50%, and I thought, gee, I should be able to do better. As a consumer, I should be at 80%. I should be able to do more. So what do consumers need to do to engage differently in this conversation and engage differently other than, there's obviously spend their money, but how do we really mobilize and use the power of consumers? Maybe, Laurent, I can start with you to help accelerate what you're talking about doing.
They have to express what they want. I think they can express what they want. We are in an increasingly open and connected world, and our organization, Nestlé, is likewise. We want to be open and connected. We want to collaborate. We believe in the power of collective action. And of course, innovation can come from any place, any part. We got one way consumers can co-create is also through open innovation challenges, for instance. But they can express their wish. They can vote by, as I said at the start, buying, not buying. So there are so many ways. I think one of the beauties of the world of today, if we compare decades ago, post-World War II, time of scarcity, when the power was in the producer's hands, the one that could produce had the power. And then progressively with retailing developing, few retailers controlling access to the consumers, the power shifted to the distributors and to the retailers. Nowadays, the power is in the hands of the consumers. Thanks to what? Thanks to this. They can buy, before they had to buy at the corner of the street. Now they can buy from Singapore, from Johannesburg, from wherever they want, just at the tip of their finger, and of course they can express themselves, and they can make a big impact, passing their message in so many different ways. So of course they are certainly part of the solution. They are an inspiration. They are the motivation also to make this impact at scale. And I forgot to mention one thing regarding, how do we educate, how do we train? And I would say that for a company like ours, it's not only a must and has to become central, but if we would not operate that way, we would have big difficulties to recruit the best talents. The best talent, they don't want to waste the world. They don't want to waste resources. They want to find a meaning in what they do. So it's also good in this respect that if you want to get the best talent, you need to task them to work, to contribute to resolve part of the biggest issues the world is facing, and that's certainly one of them.
Thank you. Karsten, how are you guys bringing that consumer voice in as you're bringing in your incubators and those organizations?
We bring them in as advisors. So, for example, the young mother can give advice on how could a diaper be produced so that it still has the full functionality and at the same time has a higher degree of recyclability. So that is in terms of focus groups that we use them. But if I may make one other point on the consumer, because as consumers we are kind of messy. So actually in the big circles we are trying to close, we consumers are the ones who are creating the greatest entropy. So we are mixing waste streams. Waste per se is not a big problem, and if you look at plastic, if you have a clean PET and what have you stream, it can easily be recycled. But we are throwing everything into the waste bin, and it is becoming soil. So our greatest contribution as consumers could be to keep waste streams clean. That doesn't mean we should wash every yogurt cup and collect it separately, but finding ways which make it easier for us to have clean waste streams could be a big contribution on the sides of the consumers. So reducing messiness and entropy on our end.
I assume you would agree with that, Surendra? Are there other things consumers can do to help facilitate that end of life?
I'm sure they would be willing to contribute their bit. The most important thing which I've seen is that we need to give them choice. We need to give them the options. And we need to educate them that if they don't do this, this is the consequences. And some of the information, which is very simple thing to execute, for instance, recently there came out information that if you sort out the plastics or all kind of waste at the origin, the impact is 13 times more than the mixed plastics or mixed waste. It would be recycled only 5% in the case of mixed plastic waste, and it would be 65%. Now, I'm sure if we inform them the consequences that, look, if you do mix, this is going to be the recycling. If you do this, this is going to be the recycling. They would be gladly willing to do it. So we need to give them more information without let them making extra efforts. They have so many things in the world to do. This is something we have to put them at appropriate point to their mindset.
We've talked a lot about what needs to happen on the ground to make this happen. But what role do political leaders and corporate leaders need to play in setting the stage for enabling this or getting out of the way so it can happen naturally? What, I know you mentioned regulation, Laurent, but what are the roles we think that the political and corporate leaders need to take? So Laurent, do you want to start, and then?
Yeah, so regulation is certainly one of the dimensions. We have seen the European Green Deal. The EU will certainly make an impact and set precedent, set the framework for the rest of the world. Investments in infrastructure are certainly of the essence. You can have the best of intention, and if infrastructures are not there, or if you don't support existing ones, or if you don't support, because there are many ways you can support infrastructure. There is, in developing countries, all this movement and all this business of informal pickers that with little funds can get organized, can get empowered, enabled to be part of the solution. So investment doesn't mean necessarily billions, but investments at every level, global, regional, local, is absolutely essential, and can be public-private. We do invest or co-invest in investment infrastructure, but the challenge is so massive that, of course, governments and regions, municipalities have to walk the talk there. And then education. And education can be the role of the business, can be the role of the political leaders. We all have in mind the work that has been done to fight smoking. I would dream to see as much being done at schools, to teach the children what circularity entails, what could be the benefits, what they can do. And we know that if you teach the children, you will teach the parents. So it's there, the framework is there, just has to happen, and it's not that complicated, and there as well, the private sector can participate.
That's great. And do you want to add in? Yep.
Personally, I believe that the governments and the politicians, they can not only be the enabler of the plastic circularity or different kind of circularity, I think they are the drivers. If you ask me the question, who is responsible for reducing the plastic waste, recycling, I would straight away attribute it to the regulatory situations. And I think they have to play a very important role. Let's look at the Basel Convention. This was enacted with good intention, but the unintended consequences is that the plastic recycling has come down sharply in the developing world. So I have few suggestions for the bureaucrats and the politicians that you have to take actions through fiscal measures. For instance, reduce the sales tax on goods made from recycled plastics or make it concessional like the Koreans have done it. Provide extra depreciations on machineries which are put for repurposing, reusing of the materials like US has done or Netherlands has done 36% extra depreciation allowance. Give preferential treatment in public procurement, like in the US you have an EPEAT system where the goods made from recycled products, particularly in the electronic industry, have preferential treatment in the procurement. And most important, particularly in the developing world, the governments, the politicians should make long-term, non-changeable, predictable regulation. That's the most difficult. You see that in Europe, Europe has regulations that in vehicles, every vehicle should be recyclable to the extent of 85% by weight. This was announced in 2005 for implementation in 2015. And that's why a small country like Belgium, where I live, they have 16 car shredder plants, as opposed to in India, there's only 1 or 2. Belgium has almost 1 million tons of resource because of this recycling. To be a predictable long-term regulatory framework, and they have to make a long-term targets. I think it's very important the government makes a long-term targets on every kind of materials made from plastic, metal, paper, whatever is the most important materials, and they should be corresponding regulatory framework. And then the situation would change dramatically. And the producers, I think, the business leaders have a responsibility to make a long-term roadmap, and they must be held accountable in their balance sheet as much as they are held accountable. I'm a CPA in the financial situations, what you have done this year, and they must be publicly shamed or praised as the situation says. Otherwise, I think consumer alone cannot do most.
Kirsten, what have you been saying?
Maybe just a very brief addition. So this predictable regulation, I think it has worked so tremendously well in many areas. Think of the seatbelt or the airbag or the catalyst. Initially, industry was saying, no, we cannot bear that. And now it's supernatural to have it. So, but it's about being predictable and providing guardrails for the industry. And then they're happy to act.
One of the things I'd like to get perspective on is there's a lot of innovators and disruption in the circular space, and that's great, right? It is. But then also large companies are trying to innovate and partner with innovators and bring this together. What needs to happen for the disruptors and the innovators to work with the existing organizations, or at least get some of the scale that we were talking about, go from being incubated to really being at scale for some of these solutions? What is, kind of getting in the way of either scaling incubators or you getting scale? I mean, Nestle is a huge organization, and you mentioned you still struggle to get scale on some of your programs. So I'd like to talk a little bit about how do we use those innovators and entrepreneurs and create real momentum and scale. I don't know, Karsten, if you want to start, since you've been working with them.
So the way we are trying it is to do a proper matching. So obviously there is a need on the sides of the startups for technical support, for funding, what have you, and vice versa. Companies are wanting to have talent from the startups, but you need to have a proper matching. Very much like in the personal space, yeah. If you go on matching platforms, for us, yeah, we want to make sure that it's a good match, and that is what we try to do. That the first interaction companies and startups have is fruitful, and then they will continue. So, setting up the right criteria, which is not so much by industry, if you ask me, but which is by capabilities. So in the general sense of we should not be looking to match somebody from the automotive industry with someone who wants to build new cars, but it's capabilities like collection, like sorting, like technical recycling, and working with different material streams that we need to bring together. Because, like for example, a Tesla and a washing machine producer, they have much more in common than a Tesla and many other automotive producers, because there is like an electromotor in it, there's glass in it, there is steel in it. So seeing where those matches are best, that will then establish an interaction which bears fruit.
Laurent?
Yeah, one of the challenges that I see, generally speaking, and then I'll come to Nestlé and making a connection with what you said, that the world is very much focused on the short term, the political agenda, the economic agenda, increasingly focused on the short term, and those issues are not only long term, they are very long term in nature. And if I look at, for instance, a company like Nestlé, the planning cycle for those issues or those objectives that we want to deal with, they are way beyond the usual business planning cycle, which would be 3, 5, 10 years maybe. Those issues are 20, 30 years. The commitment to net zero is 2050, so it's very, very long term by nature. So I think there is a little bit of that tension which creates difficulties globally and sometimes also for the business. So on our side, we are a lot in test and learn mode. There are so many dimensions to circularity. So we talk about plastic waste, but energy, water, food, you name it. I mean, there are so many dimensions to it. So we are testing, piloting a number of initiatives. So it's logical that not all of them will get to scale. I guess the tipping point is when we see that the moment when we see that the project or the initiative makes economic sense and is economically viable, then there is no discussion and the investments at scale are happening. But I think it's logical that we got proliferation of initiatives, again, because of the nature of the issues and opportunities and the complexity of our business and the global and local dimensions to it. So I'm not concerned about that, but more focused on identifying the ones that will be the game changers and that will be both environmentally, economically, and socially sustainable, and then put the resources behind.
And then what about innovation in your space?
Personally, I think we need to differentiate between what's the game changer in a developing world and what's the game changer in developed world. I think they have a different set of local, you talked about local and global things. Many times in the Western world, we tend to talk that we should stop the use of plastics. We should try to reduce the amount of plastics. But I believe if you do that in the developing world, which are still on the emerging economies, they would suffer from the food freshness, insecurity. They would have an issue with the medical safety, with the economy of fuel. So we have to see things from a different angle between these two countries, between these regions. And from my point of view, I think when it comes again, I have to say from my experience, what I do in plastics, we have in plastic waste only two kinds of solutions, mechanical recycling and now coming chemical recycling. And I believe these two are not sufficient to tackle the issue, which is so enormous issues. We need to keep on working on innovations. I can give you data, information, the quantity. Even if Mr. Bill Gates is sitting here with $100 billion, he cannot solve the problem. It's difficulty in arranging the infrastructure, in creation of machineries and plant. If we follow the mechanical things, it's a challenge of getting sufficient quantity at one location for chemical recycling. There are huge challenges, and I think innovation. I'm praying to the God that something comes up so quickly that this problem needs to be sorted out pretty soon.
Excellent. Well, I want to give a chance for our audience to ask some questions of the panelists. And do we have a microphone for them? We'll start here and then go over here.
Thank you. My name is Philippe Monnier from Switzerland. I represent several organizations. I have a question to Mr. Laurent Freysch. You mentioned that what is needed is smart regulations. Could you elaborate a little bit and also mention who, in your view, which country have the best smart regulation, and which one still have some room for improvement?
Well, there are many dimensions to it, obviously. The fiscal part is extremely important. Creating incentives or penalizing those who are doing harm and not playing by the rule of circularity. Increasingly should be the name of the game. So I really believe in that, certainly at individual and at global and company level. And creating this global framework like we see in Europe, and Switzerland is also a point in case, like the EU, having this long-term planning, creating the right framework for business and individuals to define their plans and plan their investments, to work within the framework. Certainly makes a massive difference. So yeah, I would tend to see Europe as more advanced than the rest of the world in this respect.
Thanks. And then I think over here.
Hi, my name is Martijn Lopez-Cardozo. I'm actually a serial circular entrepreneur, so I love your Valley initiative. And now the CEO of Circle Economy, NGO. So the 9% number actually came up out of one of the Circularity Gap report. So my question is actually the following. It's like we have seen actually that number go down. Like as you mentioned on the plastic recycling overall level, circularity has gone down. So the linear machine is sort of outpacing us. So the question really is, to me, it seems like people react to a crisis, right? COVID, big crisis, a lot of change happened. Now we have the geopolitical situation, 210 billion in getting independent of oil and gas. So my question, especially to Surendra and Laurent, is what crisis do you believe we need in order for circularity truly to happen?
Did I hear what price or crisis?
Crisis.
Well, when it comes to plastic, I think there is already a crisis. There is a tremendous amount of ignorance. It just needs to be brought in the mindset of the people. We just have to give the picture that this is your room, only 10% you are cleaning up, 90% you are leaving for your grandchildren to take care of it. There is a crisis. But how do we solve it? That's the key point. And I think when it comes to circularity, the most important point is, do we have infrastructure for collection of the waste at the end of its life? Do we the product at the end of its life? This is the key point. If we can sort out this point, somebody pays for the collections, I think the crisis proportion would not come on its own. And how do we pay? Multiple systems. We talked about levy, EPR system, but personally, and this is something I'd like to promote extensively amongst yourself, the use of carbon credit. So you can insist on your governments that we have to price the carbon. And this carbon credit system, I was part of the discussions which took place in COP26 in Glasgow. And I remember with bated breath, even until the last days, there was not much discussion on the carbon credit. And finally, on the last days, they agreed on the carbon credit after dragging their feet for many years. And they came out on rules governing carbon credit, on rules, how to avoid double counting, how to have cross-border things, how to avoid the issues of the old credits. And now I believe personally, with the rules which are changed in Article 6, the circularity presents a tremendous arbitrage opportunity to the investment community. This is something we need to spread around, that who's paying for the cost of collection? Nobody's paying. But it would come back to you in the form of carbon credit or plastic credit, and this is what we need to promote, and then the situation would come to a solution.
Laurent, did you want to give your way in on the crisis?
No, the crisis is there. There is no doubt. And we see its impacts. We certainly do not see the worst of its impacts. This is probably the difficulty compared to COVID or compared to war in Ukraine. That is tangible, people can see and can feel. So I think the consciousness is there increasingly. I think the leadership is moving increasingly. There are impacts, but maybe they are not visible today. But hopefully they will be down the road. Let me take just one example. We have embarked on that journey of circularity and net zero already years ago. And we know that we passed our carbon peak in 2019. Is it visible? No. Is it important? Yes. Is it showing that we are on the right journey? Certainly. Will we get to zero? Yes, I'm convinced. But there will be a lot of efforts, a lot of investments, billions that we'll have to spend down the road to moving from starting to reduce to getting to net zero. So it's just the long-term and the multi-dimensional nature of this crisis that makes it so complicated to grab in its entirety. So I guess what is important is that everyone start to move in the right direction, and once solutions are identified, capital being mobilized and scaling up happening to make sure that we get the impact at scale that we need, because the crisis is there. There is no doubt about that.
So I know we had a question over here, and then I see some in the back, but here.
Thank you. My name is Stientje van Veldhoven. I'm co-chairing the platform for the acceleration of the circular economy, vice president of the World Resources Institute, and before this role I was the Minister for the Environment in the Netherlands, and I worked a lot on circularity. There's a lot of speak about regulation. Of course, being a former minister, I certainly know the power of regulation, but that's not all we need. There's much more that we need, and I loved the fact that you brought up the carbon credits. So my question is, I have two questions. My first question is, if circularity were part of SBTIs, would you set a target for circularity as part of your overall climate commitments? And the second one is, procurement is absolutely key. Now we can talk about public procurement, but you're all sitting on the wallet of your own organization. What do you do in terms of procurement to also help other organizations get on this path to circularity? We can all be the driver of our own ecosystem. And to give you a very small example, at one of the visits that I did with the King of the Netherlands, we visited a small company in the south of the Netherlands that makes work clothes for people that do security, etc. And they at some point decided to only produce 100% circular clothing. And they got clients who asked them to produce that. And that is why a mill in Turkey and a factory in Pakistan are now producing 100% circular. Is that because circularity is already a great vibe in Pakistan? No, but it's because the question that has been asked is different, and that question spurred innovation. So we can all contribute. And if you want to know more about PACE, don't hesitate to ask me.
Thank you. So, Laurent, I know Nestle has set science-based targets, and I know that's maybe not your particular role, but maybe you can comment on whether you would welcome a circularity dimension of those targets.
Yeah, so I guess around all those topics and dimensions, there is They need to have common definitions. So if a good one would emerge and become part of SBTI, of course, we would embrace it. And back to the point of regulation, I don't say that it's just regulation. I say that there are many things, but that regulation can help. Probably more than regulation, the other two dimensions are equally, if not even more critical. Investments. We need investments, and investment can go from the public as well as the private sector. And we need to invest a lot more in education. Yeah.
And I'm happy to talk to you offline about some of the research on sustainable and responsible sourcing that we have seen coming through to bring just that part of both Scope 3 and circularity together into procurement. I think we had a question here and then in the back, and then we'll probably be at time. We'll do two more.
My name is from DSV, so I'm in global transport and logistics, which is a nice contributor to emissions as well. We are fully aware of that and work hard on it. And I think it's interesting to hear here that you're talking about carbon credits as well, because that comes in all sessions when we talk about what we can do in our industry as well. So I guess it's a necessity that somebody moves on that very quickly and gets an alignment on it. Question being, I don't believe that consumer interest in circularity is less now than it has been. So what is it we need to do to educate 6 billion plus people in the world to ensure that we get the renewables or recycling involved? Is it a case of us not having educated, not making it clear enough for consumers, or is it a case that consumers are simply unwilling to do anything?
So I know we mentioned before some misinformation, and Laurent, your idea about how far upstream do we go if we educate the youth, they educate your parents. Other thoughts in terms of education that the team wanted to bring in? I know those were the two things that kind of had come up, and dispelling misinformation, which is also a big part of this piece. Well, maybe I will.
I would certainly make it part of the curriculum, the same way children are taught ethics or hygiene practices, or they should certainly learn about sustainability and circularity. So I guess there is a very simple way, which is to make it a compulsory part of the curriculum globally.
All right, I think we had a question in the back, and then I think we will be at time, but we can continue a casual conversation, but I want to let people get to their next sessions. Yeah.
Thank you. Carlos Eduardo Vargas from Caracas, Venezuela, part of the Global Shapers community. I have a question regarding especially emerging markets or fragile contexts like for example, Venezuela, but also a big part of LATAM. When it comes to circularity and even in the next level to responsible consumption. The question may be addressed to Karsten, but feel free to answer it as well. Basically what we have seen, I'm co-founder of a social innovation community with a focus on youth in Venezuela. And what we've seen in our country and also again in the region is that there are initiatives taking place a lot in terms of sustainable or circular based products, and again, as in general, responsible consumption. But when we're talking about local shops or really hard to reach contexts where these products are being commerced, there has been this barrier between trying to make it to scale those initiatives in order to be sustainable or broader impact within a specific context. So my question is specifically with the Circular Valley, which I think is an amazing initiative. What specific vehicles or tools have you seen in? You mentioned, for example, that you were working with Peru and other countries for these initiatives that are in a community. On a ground-based approach to take the next level and to be able to scale. Thank you.
Yeah, we had a very nice example from Ecuador in the last batch. So in Ecuador, it's $1 per tire that is a mandatory fee, and out of that, Ecuador finances an organization that makes sure that all used tires get collected. So they have programmed an app where wherever you are in Ecuador and you have a bunch of tires, you can key it in and they will be picked up. So, but there is a slight fee in it involved, so it needs to be financed. But we are not talking millions here. We are talking a couple of 100,000 that helps this organization run and make sure that the whole of Ecuador gets rid of old tires, and then it's being fed into the industrial value chain. So it's polymerized again, and what have you. So slight financial incentive and dedicated people with a high interest to make it work.
All right. Well, listen, we are at our time, and so I invite. I want to thank our panelists here for a great discussion, and audience for great questions. I want to end with just one comment, which is we talk about all the challenges, but for those of us who've been talking about this for a long time, we should acknowledge the bright spots that are represented both here on the panel and in the audience of the organizations and companies who are committed to circularity and to advancing it, and the innovators who are innovating in the space, the companies that were founded and committed to creating a circular model, and the organizations like PACE and the Alliance to End Plastic Waste that are there to bring us all together. So we should take also some hope away from this, not just a focus on the challenge. But thank you so much for joining us, and thank you, panelists.